Episode 35, Escape from Stone Shell Prison. Stone Shell Prison loomed before Cobal as he stepped out of the flying croc, its towering walls seeming to stretch up to the sky. He could see Koopa troops patrolling on turrets, bill blasters freshly polished and shining in the sun, and black imperial flags flapping in the wind. All around them, the ocean sparkled in the sun, its waves crashing against the fortress's stone foundation. The flying croc had landed on the large flat platform before the fortress entrance, which was presumably intended for the ships of visiting officers. Naturally, a large delegation had assembled at the main entrance as soon as the Kremling aircraft had first appeared, loads of Koopas, Goombas, Shy Guys, and the like. Strike led the group, with Prince Peasley, King K. Rool, Clump, and Crusha walked between him and Cobal, their heads hung low and defeated-looking expressions on their faces. Cobal was quite thankful Strike had invited himself into Cobal's revolutionary schemes now. Without a Koopa troop officer, there was no way this plan could work. The head of the group of Koopa troop members in front of the main entrance, a hammer bro with a bristling brown mustache, took a few steps forward and looked the Kremlings and the Beanish prince over.
King K. Rool and Prince Peasley? This is quite the catch,
he said appreciatively.
Sir, why were we not informed they were to be transferred here, beforehand? My superiors are busy fighting the war,
Strike replied coolly.
They don't have time to deal with things like that. I'm just doing my duty getting these has-beens out of the way so they don't impact our empire's plans for victory. A noble cause, to be sure.
The mustached hammer bro nodded.
Colonel ARan, at your service.
He gave a short bow, before gesturing Strike to come in inside.
Please do enter. We have cells for all these four. You can be certain they will never trouble our empire again. Thank you, sir.
Strike replied calmly, giving ARan a crisp salute. He then began to walk towards the huge doorway, Cobal following with the prisoners. As he walked through the group of assembled Koopa troop members, he felt a strange admiration for Strike. The guy had confidence. He seemed perfectly at ease, even though he was walking right into one of the Empire's most secure fortresses. That was something most would struggle with. The interior of Stone Shell Prison was built of brown stone, and it was full of so many twisting corridors Cobal began to worry he'd get lost. The rooms he glanced into all seemed to be weapons rooms or barracks, there were no signs of the actual prisons. They passed through an open door made of solid iron, and then another, until Cobal was sure they were at the heart of the fortress. The first cell Cobal saw contained a large, muscular ape with brown fur, who glowered at the passing guards. Cobal looked at him with wide eyes. Could it be the legendary friend of Mario's? Donkey Kong? If the look in King K. Rool's face was any indication. Yeah, it was. The heart of Stone Shell Prison was a long hallway lined with cells, and in each cell, Cobal saw a different person, who looked at him with suspicious eyes. A pink Goomba with a pith helmet. A red-capped toad with a light strap to his mushroom cap. A blue-shelled paratroopa with old-fashioned flight cap. Cobal knew he was in the presence of some of the most famous heroes in the world, people who had fought alongside Mario himself.
It's been a while since we've got some new prisoners, ARan said casually as he continued walking down the cells, not even glancing at the imprisoned heroes. Thankfully, it doesn't look like it'll be too hard to break those one's spirits. You don't need to worry at all, Colonel.
Strike nodded.
These four will give you no problem.
Strike turned around and walked to Cobal, ARan glancing on him.
Cobal, fetch the Chuck Cola Cola from the ship. We need to celebrate.
As he said it, he glanced at one of the cells. Whatever Strike had in mind, it had nothing to do with Chuck Cola Cola. Cobal nodded, turned around, and walked away. The delegation of Koopa troops continued to walk down the hallway. Cobal waited until their footsteps faded away. Then he turned to look at the cells. The cell directly before Cobal was identical to all the others, a hard steel door with a small window on the top looking into a claustrophobic and scarcely furnished cell. Seated on the hard bed, Cobal could see a pink-skinned Yoshi, sitting still and looking at the ground. The cell door appeared formidable, but Cobal had a hunch that it was designed to be impossible to break out of. Not break into. Once he was certain that there were no Koopas nearby, he focused all of his power and smashed into the electronic lock. It shattered, the door springing open. Instantly, the pink Yoshi looked up. He seemed completely alert, even though he had seemed broken a second ago.
Wait! What?
He exclaimed.
Hey!
Said Cobal.
Hey!
Said the pink Yoshi. He glanced at the door.
What's all this about? Last time I checked, those creeps wanted to keep me locked up. Well, I'm not one of those creeps. Cobal grinned. In fact, I'd quite like for you to be free, if you would ask me.
The Yoshi stood up.
Is this a breakout?
He asked.
It is if we make it one.
Cobal replied. The pink Yoshi, very suddenly, laughed.
Kid, I like your spirit.
He exclaimed.
The name's Great Gonzalez, Jr., ex-champion of the Glitz Pit, ex-partner of the Great Mario. What's your story?
Cobal was suddenly overcome with emotion. The Great Gonzalez Jr.? This Yoshi was his father? Cobal's heart began to beat, and he felt his eyes grow wet. Emotions that he tried to keep bottled up came flooding to the surface.
My name is Cobal, and I... Cobal!
Gonzalez suddenly exclaimed, his voice breaking.
I had a son named Cobal. He was blue just like you, the same color as my Catherine.
Cobal suddenly embraced Gonzalez, much to the older Yoshi's shock.
Dad?
He exclaimed, letting all his emotions out at once.
I always wanted to meet you. I even tried to find videos of your fights, but there's none of it, the Empire censored it all. That's because the new Glitz Pit fighters are trash.
Gonzalez said casually.
They let me watch a couple of the fights here. Nobody's got any talent. They ain't Rock Hawk, I'll tell you that much. Look. Dad?
Cobal said, still scarcely believing that he was in the same room as his father.
I'm trying to break everyone out of here. Luigi's alive and we're working to take down the Empire.
Gonzalez stepped away from Cobal, a cocky smile on his face.
You know, kid, I'd love to learn what you've been up to all these years. The thought of you was what kept me going trapped up in this cell. It really did. But that ain't time for that. Now, kid, I wanna bring the underwear itself to this prison, and every stinking minion who works in it. Then let's do it.
Cobal said, turning around.
We've got more prisoners to free.
Gonzalez ran into the corridor.
Feels great to stretch these legs again.
He exclaimed.
Nice shades, by the way.
He said as he looked at Cobal's sunglasses.
Great to know my son has taste.
For the next few minutes, Cobal and Gonzalez worked together, smashing the locks and opening the doors. The prisoners came out, wide-eyed.
Dudes! Are we free?
Funky Kong exclaimed, looking around in confusion.
What does it look like, you dummy?
Goombella shouted, jumping up and down.
We're not free yet,
Captain Toad said, scowling.
Just because we're out of our cells doesn't mean they can't put us back in. Well, this old sea dog's hand enough of captivity,
Admiral Bobbery exclaimed, his mustache bristling.
I saw we bust out. I second that,
Goombario exclaimed. Cobal looked at the assembled people, over a dozen heroes, each one a seasoned fighter and a former ally of Mario's. If they could get out of this prison, they'd help build Luigi's ranks more than 1,000 extra fighters. But could they?
What is this?
Cobal said Colonel Couperin and Strike stepping into the hallway. Couperin's eyes were wide and he had the look of someone who was witnessing all of his nightmares come to life.
This,
said Strike, grabbing the Hammer Bro's arm.
This is the world's future.
He grabbed Couperin and hurled him against the wall. The colonel hit it head first, his helmet failing to protect him. He fell to the ground, motionless. King K. Rool, Peasley, and the other Kremlings came running up behind them.
All right, let's bust outta here,
K. Rool shouted.
Yeah, what are we waiting for?
The blue-shelled Koopa, who Cobal knew was named Cooper, exclaimed.
I don't want to spend another second in this stinking prison.
Alarms began to blare as they rushed through the halls of Stone Shell Prison. Evidently, even though Colonel Couperin was taken care of, through the various security cameras their escape had been discovered.
Stop them!
Echoed voices throughout the various hallways surrounded them as Cobal rushed forward, caught up in the path of colorful figures.
Let's get this party started!
Donkey Kong exclaimed. A squad ran at them from the right, only to be swept away by Donkey Kong's massive fist. Cobal heard footsteps behind them and saw a huge gang of Koopa troops running at them, sizzling bob-bombs, Hammer Bros ready to hurl their weapons, and Goombas charging forward as fast as their little legs could carry them.
Gimme a hand here!
He shouted, sticking out his tongue to lick up the foremost Koopa before transforming him into an egg which he sent flying at a boomerang bro
on it.
Cooper shouted, going into his shell and shooting at them, scattering them.
Hey, slow down!
Captain Toad yelled.
I have Toadsworth here. He can barely walk.
Cobal looked at the Toad, supporting another Toad with a brown cape and a white beard.
We will try, but the enemy assails us from every angle,
Peasley exclaimed, using his rapier to fend off a Paragoomba.
We gotta get back to the Flying Croc,
K. Rool shouted as he punched a dive-bombing paratroopa out of the sky.
Let me clear the way,
Bobbery exclaimed, before turning to the pink, female bob-bomb beside him.
Ready to let loose, young lady? Oh, you bet, old man,
Bombette shouted, her fuse automatically lighting up.
My temper's flaring up and I'm not keeping it in any longer.
Cobal saw a huge crowd of enemies charging straight at them. Gigantic stone thwomps, huge bulky sledge bros, and dozens of smaller enemies. The bob-bombs leapt into the air, glowing orange. Then there was a colossal boom. Light flashed, blinding Cobal's eyes as a fiery explosion ripped through the corridor. When the smoke finally cleared, there were no enemies in sight and a massive hole in the walls alongside them. Bobbery and Bombette stood there, unaffected by the explosion. Cobal knew this was because they were natural bob-bombs, unlike the mechanical ones developed by the Koopa Troop, they could regenerate after exploding.
Quick, in there!
Strike shouted.
It's a shortcut to the exit. You don't need to tell us twice,
Goombario shouted, as they dived into the gaping hole. Cobal followed them, right behind Donkey Kong's hairy bulk and beside the strange, shadow-like Vivian, while the Koopa he recognized as Parakari hovered above them, still wearing his old-fashioned flight cap. They burst into a huge common room that was rapidly flooding with troops, but the group of former friends and allies of Mario cut through it like an arrowhead. There were minions assailing Cobal from all sides, but he fought back with his fists, legs, and tongue, battering minions every which way as they fought to stop the escapees' mad rush to the exit. Strike was hurling fireballs, 3 every second, while Vivian punched a Koopa out of the way with her flaming fist, and Captain Toad, having stolen a hammer from a hammer bro, gave a Goomba a solid whack.
"Heh, if I knew I'd be saving you, Donkey Kong, I don't think I would have done this,"
King K. Rool exclaimed as he kicked a Koopa Troopa out of the way with one of his large clawed feet.
"Hey, if someone told me you would ever save me, I'd tell 'em you were crazy."
Donkey Kong laughed, slamming a boomerang bro down.
"How about we declare a temporary alliance?"
K. Rool said, as he hurled his crown to take out a squad of paratroopas and paragoombas before catching it again in one of his hands.
"Thought you would never ask,"
Donkey Kong cried. The huge ape and Kremling ran to the front of the group. Donkey Kong spun his body, smacking the enemies out of the way, while K. Rool rushed in a wild charge, bowling them over with his bulk.
"Seal the doors!"
Cobal heard a Koopa cry.
"Notify High Command!"
screamed a Shy Guy. However, he was quickly silenced by a well-timed egg. Parakari darted through the air like a missile, smashing through windows and knocking out the Koopas in the control room, preventing them from calling reinforcements. Leaving hundreds of dazed minions on the floor, the group made their way to the entrance hall. Cobal's entire body ached, but, as he and Gonzales worked together to take out one last charge in Chuck, he had never felt happier. Soon, they were all going to be free. The main door to Stone Shell Prison was open, and light was spilling out into the mostly bare entrance hall. Cobal and the huge crowd of former partners of Mario stopped forward. There was a single figure standing in the doorway, his elongated shadow stretching down the hall. It was a Koopa troop, dressed in a spotless white suit and a white hat.
"Hello there, my friends,"
he said in a cheerful voice.
"My name is Skulls Fortescue, and I'm afraid you can go no further."
From beside him, Cobal's father laughed.
"You're right,"
he shouted, his voice echoing around the room.
"I'm sure that's what all those guards though, too. But we showed 'em. You can't stop us once we've gotten started, punk." "Yeah,"
K. Rool shouted.
"Out of our way. You've got real nerve trying to stop us, all alone like that,"
laughed a light green female Boo who Cobal recognized from the stories as Lady Bow. Cobal glared at the Koopa who was facing them. The Koopa had a calm, peaceful smile on his face that seemed to him confident. Too confident considering the odds. He got an odd premonition that something very, very bad was about to happen. Skulls Fortescue laughed lightly.
"Oh, really?"
he asked, briefly covering his left eye with his right hand. When he withdrew it, the eye was glowing orange.
"You know, you could just go back to your cells right now,"
he said.
"It would save you a lot of pain. I know it sounds cowardly, but trust me, you will thank me for giving you this chance. I might look young, but I fought in the First Koopa War, where both King Morton and the Mushroom Kingdom's hero Antonio acknowledged my power. Let me put that into context. That means I am more powerful than Mario was, even in his prime." "That's ridiculous,"
Gonzales shouted.
"You never knew the guy like I did."
Without another word, he charged forward, running across the brown stone floor towards the Koopa. Suddenly Cobal became very frightened. The cold, confident smile never left Skull's face. As Gonzalez approached, he stretched out his left hand. Gonzalez went flying as if struck by an invisible force, collapsing on the opposite wall.
Gonzalez!
Vivian exclaimed.
You're gonna regret that!
Cobal shouted angrily at Skulls. Even though he was so nervous, he felt as if he was shaking.
I'll take him from the left, you take him from the right!
Cooper exclaimed, ducking into his shell and igniting it with fire. He shot like a rocket at Skulls, curving around as Cobal darted for the enemy Koopa's right side. Calmly, Skulls pointing his hand first at Cooper's flaming shell, then at Cobal. Cobal felt a cold, hard force slam into him, sending him flying across the room. He hit the wall, his vision blurring. He hadn't seen the attack coming. How could he have dodged it? In the corner of his eye, he saw Goombella flipping through her catalog rapidly.
There's nothing on this guy's power!
She exclaimed frightfully.
We're going in blind here. That ain't a problem to me!
Donkey Kong exclaimed.
Come on, he can't take all of us!
Rushing forward, Donkey Kong charged towards Skulls, the rest of the partners, plus K. Rool, Peasley, and Strike, rushing at him. Skulls snapped his fingers, and bricks flew out of the wall to circle around him. He launched them like bullets, striking the partners and knocking them down. Donkey Kong smashed one of them out of the air in a desperate attempt to reach Skulls, but Skulls pointed a finger at him, sending him flying across the room. His eye shone like a miniature star. Peasley ducked under one of the flying bricks and aimed a stab at Skulls, who launched him away before spinning around to take out Diddy Kong, who had attempted to get behind him.
How long are you going to keep this up?
Skulls asked, beginning to walk forward. The heroes, groaning, began to rise to their feet, weakly.
Admit it. Your time is over.
Skulls said, stretching out his left hand. A brick underneath it contorted and condensed until it molded into a sword which rose into his hand.
Your career as heroes died with Mario. Accept it. Everyone!
Came a weak voice from the end of the hall, near where they had entered. Cobal, who had by now rose, his body aching, saw Toadsworth, weakly leaning on his cane.
You can't beat him!
The ancient Toad exclaimed, the act of talking seeming like an effort for him.
Maybe you could have in the past, but 20 years in prison has made you weaker. We must get out the other way. I ain't abandoning the flying croc!
K. Rool exclaimed.
Don't be stupid, boss!
Clump yelled.
This guy's going to kill us if we try to get past him!
Skulls raised his sword, the light from his eye glinting off the blade.
He's right!
Goombella exclaimed. Cobal hated to run. He felt like a coward, retreating from this one Koopa, who had mysteriously shown up. But, without any strategy or any knowledge of Skull's powers, there was no way they could beat him.
Let's go!
He shouted, running for Toadsworth. The other escapees joined him, Donkey Kong helping to pick up Toadsworth so that they could get away faster. Strike launched a storm of fireballs at Skulls to slow him down, but the white-clothed Koopa just waved his hand, causing them to evaporate before him. They dashed through the big hall, full of knocked-out Koopa troop guards, and back into the corridors. Cobal looked behind him. Skulls was coming for them. He was calmly walking down the hallway, in which he walked, the bricks of the fortress shot out and floated out around, as if he was a black hole they couldn't help but to be drawn to. Even though he was walking slowly, Skulls seemed to be catching up to them, no matter how fast they ran. Just what kind of powers did this Koopa have? Who even was he? Was he a high-ranking agent of the Koopa Empire or something else?
I saw a Koopa cruiser parked on the roof. Peasley shouted. We have to reach it. He's gaining on us. Parakari yelled. If he starts launching those bricks, we're doing 4. Not if I have anything to say about it. Strike exclaimed, turning around and stretching out one of his hands. The entire corridor was bathed in orange light as he surrounded a huge fireball, so hot it made Cobal's skin sweat. He fired it like a rocket at Skulls, only for it to sizzle the second it got within 4 feet of him. Attacks like that won't work, old boy. Bobbery exclaimed, leaping up and running down towards Strike. Leave it to me, I'll stall him. No way, Bobbery. Gonzalez shouted, rushing to the old Bob-omb's side. We're all getting out of here. And that means you too. Bobbery turned to Gonzalez, and Cobal thought he detected a tear in his eye. Gonzalez, this old sea dog doesn't have much life left in him. I don't mind dying. I want to see my Scarlet again. No. He's right, Gonzalez. Vivian said with a sad voice. Skulls was coming closer, the bricks spinning around him as the corridor collapsed around the Kupa, spinning around him like a void. If we don't escape from him right now, we'll all die. Get out of here! Bobbery shouted, running towards Skulls. His fuse was lit, trailing flame behind him. Don't let my last big bomb be in vain. Let's get out of here! Gonzalez exclaimed, his voice choking. Joining the rest of them, Cobal began to run, urging his legs to move as fast as possible. He felt a deep sadness about Bobbery. He had never known him personally, but he had heard the stories of how he had helped Mario sail to the cursed island of Keelhaul Key and even faced off against the evil Queen of Darkness herself. Behind him, Cobal heard the sound of a humongous explosion as smoke and light filled the corridor. Finally, Cobal saw light. He ran up a spiral staircase in the middle of the crowd, finally reaching the top of a tower which appeared to be some kind of landing pad. A Koopa cruiser was parked there, its blue hull glinting in the sunlight. I'll get us out of here as fast as possible, boss! Krusha exclaimed, bolting up the extendable entrance stairway. Quick, we don't know how far behind he is! Goombario exclaimed, rushing into the cruiser after him. Careful! Diddy Kong warned Donkey Kong as the two boarded, Toadsworth still in Donkey Kong's arms. You don't want to bump that old Toad around. Cobal boarded the Koopa cruiser with his father beside him. Gonzalez looked haunted. Cobal couldn't imagine what he was going through. Having to abandon a companion he had fought with through all those intense battles. Even as the staircase retracted and the door hissed closed, the engine was already starting to rumble. They were getting out of here. The Koopa cruiser rocketed away from Stone Shell Prison. Cobal stood on the deck, wind blowing around him as he watched the fortress grow further and further away. Gonzalez was beside him, staring at the ocean with a sad expression on his face. It didn't feel like a victory, with the seemingly invincible enemy and Admiral Bobbery's sacrifice. But that was exactly what it had been. Now, the heroes of the Mushroom Kingdom had been freed. Cobal had dealt the Koopa Empire its largest blow yet. Suddenly, one of the towers of Stone Shell Prison began to shake. Slowly, it began to rise, shaking bricks and rubble off as it turned in mid-air, pointing itself at the Koopa cruiser. Cobal's heart stopped as he realized what was going on. It's that Koopa! He shouted. He's launching the entire tower at us! Gonzalez instantly snapped upwards. It's like a massive bullet bill! He exclaimed, rushing down off the deck and down the staircase leading into the ship's interior. Cobal followed him, his footsteps ringing on the metal stairs. Dodge! Dodge!
Gonzalez shouted as he rushed into the bridge, where Crusher was at the wheel.
That crazy Koopa! He's throwing a whole tower at us. Doesn't this guy know when to quit?
K-Rool screamed.
Hold on to something, 'cause you're all about to feel real sick.
Crusher shouted, grabbing the wheel and yanking it roughly to the left. The entire Koopa cruiser tilted, causing Cobalt and everyone else on the bridge to slide to one side. Out of the main window, Cobalt saw the tower go flying fast.
We need to get away from this guy,
Goombella shouted.
Put this thing into full speed. Ya don't need to say it, lady,
Crusher replied, pulling a lever which made the Koopa cruiser jerk forward before rocketing into the clouds, away from the prison at last. Cobalt's heart was beating.
If we had been just 5 minutes too late,
he thought to himself,
that guy could have killed us all.
Skull stood at the top of the stone shell prison's battlements, watching at the Koopa cruiser faded into a speck on the horizon. It was surprising they had managed to escape him, he reflected as the tower he had launched fell into the water with a splash. This could prove troublesome in the future. Skulls heard footsteps behind him, and he turned to see Admiral Bobbery walking up to him weakly. Skulls regarded him with disinterest. His explosion had been impressive for a bomb and had gutted a fair amount of Stone Shell Prison's interior, but it, quite naturally, had failed to injure him.
You lost, old boy.
Bobbery laughed weakly.
They're gone. Go tell King Bowser you let Mario's allies escape. That blustering reptile won't be able to sleep. Oh, don't assume I work for Bowser,
Skulls replied, crossing his arms as he stared the aged Bob-omb down.
I was here on my own accord. Don't believe that these heroes will be able to change the course of history, Admiral.
He smiled coldly.
Only tragedy will come to them, like it will come to you. Do what you want,
Bobbery barked.
I'm not afraid to die. I'm ready to see Scarlet again. Then let me grant that wish,
Skulls replied calmly. He stretched out his hand, his left eye shining, as he levitated Bobbery into the air. The Bob-omb didn't struggle. He stared defiantly at Skulls. Skulls' orange eye shone red. Rays of light shone from Bobbery and there was a flash of light. When it disappeared, Bobbery was gone. Skulls turned to the ocean and stared at the horizon, adjusting his hat. Yes, these heroes were persistent. Perhaps they were even persistent enough to warrant attention from 7 stars.
I'm going to have to inform the Grand Star about this,
Skulls said to himself as he turned and walked away, the smooth, sparkling ocean behind him.